Yes.
You have an AI companion now.
I don't know what that is.
I don't know either. It sounds scary. I don't know that I want to turn it on.
Oh, good heavens.
Good morning.
Not sitting here.
No. You are. Hi. Okay, well, I guess we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. Yeah, we've got extra copies of the pack if anyone needs a book. So welcome to chapter 18. And I think we're focusing on miracles, especially healings and the loaves and fishes. Patient of loaves and fishes in this chapter. So I thought we began and just kind of touch base about what we think a miracle is. And on this handout, I've given you just, I really like this New Testament scholars. He's got an entire book on miracles, which I carried around with me for a couple of weeks, hoping I would absorb it by osmosis. Got a little bit read. But he defines a miracle very simply as God's presence and power in creation that is, beyond human agency. So, and then I was reading something the other day that talked about there are magnificent miracles and then there are everyday miracles. So got onto that. And would someone mind reading for us this little definition?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
A cancer inexplicably clearly, a voice in a dream, a statue that weeps. A miracle is an event that strengthens faith. It is possible to look at most miracles and find a rational explanation in terms of natural cause and effect. It is possible to look at miracles and find a rational explanation in terms of paint and canvas. Faith in God is less apt to proceed from miracles than miracles from faith in God.
So that's do people still know who Frederick Beekman is? He was a Presbyterian minister. His ministry was a lot in writing, and he ended up worshiping in an Episcopal church for the last 20 years, 30 years of his life. He died in the last few years at about 95. At any rate, this is sort of his little bit on miracles. And I think I heard someone say they weren't understanding. Was it the last sentence in particular?
Yeah.
Faith in God is less apt to proceed from miracles than miracles from faith in God. Anyone want to take a stab at it? I can, but
They talk a little bit about that in
they
this
do,
chapter, so.
yeah. And then they have had, did they have one of those little sidebars on that?
Okay.
And it's page 244. Yeah.
234, thank you. Yes,
When people believe Jesus is the power to heal them in John, the miracles are signs that lead to belief. People see the miracle and then they believe.
so, and, that's, remember, I don't know about y'all, but I start getting very confused about what's in this book and what's in, just in my head, remembering the Bible, but, after the multiplication of the loaves and fishes, where 5,000 people plus women and children fed, all they want, there's all this basket left over. In at least one of the gospels, perhaps more, probably more. So many people are thronging towards Jesus right after this miracle, and that seems to have brought them to some level of faith. As well as healings, I know some of y'all have been watching The Chosen, which I thought that do an interesting take on healings. But you get a sense when you read the Bible, but also in The Chosen, it's kind of interesting how once people start being healed, when you're just throngs of people, become for humanity. So I think that's kind of what they mean, but I mean, does anyone else want to take on this?
Otherwise, I'm good. It was just like this last action to see from miracles to miracles from therapy. Sometimes we are the miracle for somebody else. Come out, sir. So we're prepared to share with somebody so that we know you'll find a miracle to them that we do.
Yeah, and as the author points out in John, the miracle typically is kind of a sign that directs people to faith. So, he feeds the crowd with the loaves and the fishes. And then in John, he flaps his gums for hours and hours about what this sign means. A good example of one from the synoptics is they include the story of the woman with the hemorrhage, where Jesus' last words to her are, "Daughter, your faith has made you well." So it's the other way around.
Seemed like that sentence would be better read that miracles, faith proceeds from miracles and also miracles proceeds from faith. Because I think it's both. And then if they're kind of limiting the way they would.
And I like how the question that they pose at the end, the first question at the end of the chapter is belief necessary for miracles, or do miracles lead to belief? Are both somehow true at the same time? Yeah.
So where did this statement come from?
The one on the piece of paper?
Yeah,
From a little book called Beyond Words.
okay, but not from this.
Mm-mm, mm-mm. Supplementary material. So I'm kind of interested just in your take on all these miracles, these healing stories, these demon possessions that are cured. What's your take? Is there a challenge for us today in these stories at all?
I think he was trying to get their attention.
Oh, that's interesting.
And you couldn't say, read so-and-so book and look see her. And I mean, these were pretty miraculous things that happened. They would have certainly got my attention. And how was he able to do this?
Mhm.
So I mean, I just think this is his way of teaching.
Mhm.
It's interesting, sometimes he does these things and he says, don't tell him that.
So like that.
So in that case, he's just doing it because it's the right thing to do.
The right thing to do, and it's also, I mean, he knows it's gonna get him into trouble. Also,
You think he worries about trouble?
I think he knows when, as he says in John, I think he knows when his time is right. And I think he doesn't want to torpedo himself at the very beginning of his ministry. And so I was asking people to be quiet about it. Because it does get him into a lot of trouble.
My sense is he worries about people being around him all the time and crowded up next to him. And if they go out and start telling everybody what's going to do, there's going to be a crowd, and he would rather go about doing it on his own. And then
I think when we talk about miracles, it's important to bear in mind that our perspective is so different in this regard than what it would have been a couple thousand years ago. And we're living in sort of a post-Newtonian age, I guess, where we have a sense that there's this natural order that exists. And that anything beyond that order is what we would call a miracle. Anything that we can't explain using science. And that's not really the way they would have thought about this. And so the word miracle, among biblical scholars, you'll often hear the term deeds of power used instead of miracle, because this is kind of what Jesus was doing. He was displaying his power. And this really was kind of what would have been expected from somebody who claimed to be a prophet or a Messiah. Deeds of power are kind of one of the ways that you would establish some street cred.
But in some regard, it's like, understands people, he says. He understands a lot of these things, I think, if you understood a lot of what went into some of these illnesses or whatever, you'd be able to address them.
And that's really interesting too. I think another thing that makes these challenging for us to understand, like Dave says, the context is so different. I think it's hard for us to realize what a communal context these are done in. When Jesus heals people, it's at least as in what he's really doing is restoring relationships. I mean, that's even more than sort of healing whatever physical infirmity was. He's restoring their meaning and purpose in life. And their relationships with their family and their community. I mean, like the Gerasene demoniac, there is one in here, on page 232. Of course, this is in kind of like an exorcism. But wow, this poor guy is living all by himself, kind of basically without clothes. They bind him in chains and shackles. And then he breaks their bonds. But he's all alone and isolated, and he gets restored. And Jesus says to him, return to your home. And here he says, and declare how much God has done. I think it's hard for us it's hard for me, I'll put it that way, to recognize what a physically connected world the New Testament world is. If you walk in any of their homes or kind of where they're kind of on top of each other. They literally reclined, a lot of them, at dinner. And so they lean on each other's shoulders, they're jostling together. So they're just so much more physically connected than I think one can ever imagine. And I think this connection with a restoring connection to people is a lot of what Jesus is accomplishing in these years.
I didn't understand it. I mean, I don't understand why they would shoot a man if he's in the miracle.
Oh, he's not, I don't think.
Well, I mean, he's in the miracle.
Well, and that's an interesting question. Why it's interesting because it's like this chapter is heavy on miracles. That kind of put it together that way. So why are these other stories in here? That's a really interesting question.
It was a trick, Annie.
But there's also the woman caught in adultery, which is really a miracle.
No,
So there are a couple of,
several.
it's like you said, it's heavy on miracles, but it's not.
Not
And the others, their lives are changed. But if you're trying to man, he don't change. And
As far as we know, he doesn't. Maybe he went home and thought about it. Really. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but change is a process for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it? The characteristics of a miracle that Dave said are things normally we think of as not explainable by science.
Although,
But isn't science in and of itself a miracle?
yes, see.
And
Right.
the other thing is that most miracles that we think about are for good, not things that happen that are unexplained by science that are negative. So these stories in here are all about goodness.
And so isn't that awesome to think that when God is doing God's deeds of power, that it's not about smiting people. I mean, that's not what Jesus reveals to us. God's deeds of power about building people up, restoring.
I think we need to be just cautious about how we think about miracles, especially with regard to the synoptic of miracles proceeding from faith. Because the implication is that if you ask for a miracle and it doesn't happen, because you didn't have faith, and that's what I call snake handler theology.
And you know what, it's out there, and that's part of these challenges, right, for these miracles.
But I remember, yeah,
You go ahead.
a friend of mine who was a priest posted one time on Facebook, my mother was healed, is now cancer-free, prayer works. And one of his parishioners replied, I prayed for my mother who just died of cancer. What about her? And we really, again, we really have to be careful about how we think about how this stuff works.
Plus, it's taken care of in his time, not ours, and we pray for something, like healing for somebody. It took like 12 years of praying that my sister, who had a lung disease, for her, she was cratering and dying. And all of a sudden, Houston calls and we have lung squeeze. And it took 12 years of praying, something like that. Pray cease. Yeah. Yeah.
And then sometimes, of course, in the midst of dreadful illness, healing arrives in other forms, right? And within the dreadful illness. And one of my favorite examples, it was always so vivid for me. I did hospital chaplaincy for a little over a year, and one of the patients I had was a man who'd been on dialysis for 20 years. And at the time, that was unheard of for anyone to have survived 20 years. And he was asking, why doesn't God heal me? Why doesn't God heal me? But as I listened to the story of his life, he had a wife who drove him 50 miles, 4 days a week, for his treatments. He had children and grandchildren nearby that kept him involved in everything. He could not go to the grandson's football games, so they videoed every football game and they sat down and watched it with the grandchildren. So healing is so varied in how it can. Now, I was also with him at his death about a year ago, so he was never healed of his kidney disease. But wow, did he have a lot of love coming his way, and was able to realize that as God's great gift.
My favorite author is Annie Dillard, and she talks not about miracles, but about holiness. And a miracle might simply be the ability to see the holiness that's in the world. And I think that might be what Buechner is getting at here. I think that he may be saying not that faith leads to miracles, but that faith might give us eyes to see the miracles that exist in the world around us. And one of my favorite Dillard quotes, I can't remember quite, is that there is no less holiness in the world right now as you're reading this than there was on the day that God parted the Red Sea. There's holiness all around us. And sometimes we are given eyes to see that holiness.
And it often takes relationships, us being in relationship, to open our eyes to see that. Because, for example, this gentleman just had some blinders on. Rich. Are there any particular stories you want to talk about, dive into from this chapter?
Lazarus.
Oh, okay. See, I was going to talk about Lazarus next week.
Oh, boy.
Oh,
Look at all of this. Is it okay if we wait till next week, or do you want to dive in now?
Let's wait till next week.
Not next week, but whenever.
Yeah. Yes. The fifth.
If it-
The fifth. Sorry. Yes, next week the bishop will be here, and she'll be meeting with confirmands and vestries. So
I think one of the dynamics of healing is that in my view, prayer is the strength. strength what gives you the ability to oftentimes fight the disease.
Yes.
Connection between the mind and the body and all that. I think that, especially if it's sort of seminar. Well, you know, that without it, you just might sort of give up. And it doesn't matter what kind of other kinds of healing things are there. It's not gonna work as well as you. Especially psychosomatic type of things.
I think, and you know, for someone like you, you have a powerful testimony, right? You've been through it. And you speak from experience about the power. It gives you.
But along that line, prayer helps deal with anxiety and stress and strain and all that. And there's a direct correlation between stress and strain and your blood system. So that you get adrenaline's reduced and your ability to deal with disease is better. So there's, going back to the scientific explanation, there's a direct correlation, I think, between being at peace and hopeful and healing.
It's really interesting, like the studies that have been done on kind of the scientific benefits of prayer. Have y'all, you know, read about any of these? And they're there. It's like we've known that all along, right? And but does it may give us some more confidence. I don't know. You know, I don't know. But also I think, you know, you can't just necessarily sit down if you're not a person of faith. How do you do it without a worshiping community? You know, how do you just sit down and pray if you don't, if you aren't sitting around like this and talking about how does God come to us?
So speaking about ones that don't quite fit in this, the transfiguration to me is quite fit, but it's a wonderful story.
Yes, I was gonna talk about that next week also.
Oh,
And you know, really want to talk about
I guess we know what the bishop's preaching on then.
but yeah.
Well, I'm surprised just from an editorial standpoint that they included the story of the woman caught in adultery, which I think is a
I know.
wonderful story,
Right.
but it's generally assumed by biblical scholars
Right.
and added much, much later.
Mhm.
I don't remember when, like 6th, 7th century or something. Do you remember when?
I don't remember when, but yes, I found that also fascinating. Yeah, so Dave knows one of the people, right, who put this together. So he's got a direct line. Get some insight about it. No, it's not their choice.
Yeah.
Other than proclaiming the good news of the kingdom is the name of the chapter. And certainly that story fits in that thing.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if miracles are also paradigm shifts, because I was wondering, you know, by this woman who's, nobody knows what an adulteress is. It gave such a paradigm shift to the Pharisees and those that were about to stone her to death. So can a miracle be a paradigm shift in our thinking and the way you see things?
I would say in today's world, that would be a huge miracle. Right? In a huge way, we work with God.
Rick gave us one of the greatest phrases ever.
What's that?
He was without sin, cast the first stone.
Like, oh, like that.
Yeah, powerful.
You know, so much of these, many of these, the theme of the lessons through a lot of these examples that he was taught was, he didn't say, I cured you, he says your faith cured you. And that's the paradigm shift, I think, is, it's not me that's doing it, it's because you believe in what I'm saying that the change happened. And I think that's the power of the weaving of these examples together.
Um. I love the stories of Jairus's daughter being healed and the woman with the hemorrhage being healed. I don't know about y'all, but every time I read the story, particularly, it's kind of a sandwich story, but the woman with the hemorrhage who's healed kind of in the middle while Jesus is on the way to heal Jairus's daughter. Does this not feel so contemporary? She's been to every doctor. She's spent all her money. She's not any better 12 years later than she was before. Yes, a touch.
Just touch. The numbers.
It's actually, I mean, I don't know if you see it in the chosen, but it's quite a powerful scene. Just like that, the story. She reaches out. And he turns and talks to her. That's
They do a good job with
They
it.
amazing.
I thought he was upset that he took, she touched me.
She was.
Well, he's certainly
That's not in
aware,
this-
he's
that's not in
certainly
this story.
aware of it.
You want to know who it was.
He's certainly aware of it. And, again, that was kind of a crowded jostling scene. But the other touches weren't touches, seeking and of such powerful faith. I mean, they were just kind of making their way down the street.
Are you sure he wasn't just aggravated and acted out? It doesn't in this scripture the way it's written, but I think in some scripture, he actually displayed a little bit of anger.
When he says, "Who touched me?" You mean in this
I think he said
particular?
a little more than that, some scriptures.
Well, yes, but you mean in this particular healing?
In that
story?
case, yeah, but
Mhm.
it seems like some of the texts read a little bit.
But for this same story.
Yeah.
I think the story is at least two of the same.
Mhm. I don't know.
I thought he was just yelling loud enough so it would make here.
Yeah, y'all are trying to make excuses for it.
Yeah,
I don't feel like I don't feel like I'm making an excuse for him, but I find it fascinating when he's aware that something is happening. And it, maybe it cost him a little something.
And he does call her out. He didn't have to do that. I mean, he could have just gone his way knowing, woo, I cured that woman. But he did, he called her out. And then in a sense, I think you could also, this is probably also reading into it, that restored her into community.
Yes.
Something that you can have.
And they show that in the chosen too, how shunned she is, while she's hemorrhaging for years.
This is a purity issue, not just an illness.
Well, the other miracle that I always talk about, if it's in here, I guess you're calling it the healing of the pool of the, but
Mhm.
you know the word.
That's right.
One that Jesus says to him, get down into the water. Can you not get down into the water? And so I think about these things and what I'm here glad is, and I think about those, how cripples and paralytics and lepers were not treated best.
Oh, no.
So on top of that, they're dealing with major oppression also as well.
And isolation. There's one miracle, one deed of power where Jesus cures 10 lepers, is it? And well, they're all living together, right? That's why he cures 10 of them. They can't live with their families. They have to live. There's actually a church in Israel. I can't remember where in Israel, but it's built in a cave, which is the traditional site of where these lepers would have hung out on the outskirts of town. Not only could they not live with their families, they couldn't hang out.
And this is most clearly pointed out probably in the story of the man born blind, but the assumption at the time would have been that these people's illness was punishment for some sin that they had committed, or perhaps their parents. Man born blind, who sinned, this man or his parents? He was Somebody sinned.
I like the Canaanite woman. What page is she on?
40, is that next time too?
No. It's a healing story, it's today. So essentially. You wanna say some more about that?
I just find it very interesting that Jesus was saying it's not fair to let the children go to the dogs.
Talk about, and
I mean, implying that she was a dog.
yes.
Well, there's a couple of places that was, Jesus was not displayed.
Hawaii.
Christ-like.
But I can't, maybe y'all can help me, but I always read this as at least, I just love her retort,
I
right?
know.
Yes, Lord, but even the dogs get to eat the crumbs that fall, and then it's like a light bulb goes off for him. That's how I understand it. I can't help it. So, his world has changed also. And maybe he's just had a really long, irritating day or exhausting day. He was human. He was clear human.
But he was displayed as humanity.
Yes.
He was feeling irritated.
Another scene I remember from The Chosen is, I think we're given to think Jesus has been off all day healing people, but he comes back and he's thoroughly wiped out. Do you remember this? He's like got bruises and may even have a trickle of blood down his face. This stuff didn't come without a cost.
Thought the centurions. Was a servant that was,
Yes.
but the underlying story is don't rock the boat. Healing just by saying your words, but don't come to my house because that's gonna get me in big trouble.
Oh, is that how you read it? That's interesting. Let's see, the centurion servant, which page is this on? What page? 239? Yeah. What, what I love, I think one of the things we also, it's hard for us to relate to is kind of the hierarchy of kind of powers and spirits that sort of suffuse people's lives. And, they're kind of people down here, and then they're, these spirits, different levels of spirits. Some are good, some are angelic, some are evil and demonic. And what I love here is the centurion recognizes which spirit Jesus is functioning through. Not everybody gets this, right? Some of the people who don't understand him thinks he's casting out demons through the power of a demon, right? But no, the centurion gets it. It says, I am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I say to one, go, and he goes. And to another, come, and he comes. Do this, and he does it. He knows that Jesus is functioning under God directly. And a Roman centurion sees that. And if you watch The Chosen, I think we know which Roman centurion it is, right? It's kind of interesting how they build backstories for some of these.
This is obviously a common gospel theme that we see both in the centurion and in the Canaanite woman, that the people who wind up getting who Jesus is are not the ones who are supposed to.
Which is a fascinating thread that goes back through a lot of our Old Testament stuff, right? I mean, remember how many people were not necessarily Israelites who had pivotal roles to play.
And that's the thing to me that the gospel was not intended only for the Jews. Right from the get-go, it was going to diversity. And it wasn't intended only for the children of Israel.
But perhaps even Jesus had to learn that lesson,
Yes.
you know, with the story of the Canaanite.
Right, well, they're starting with the centurion and the Canaanite woman, and then by the time he gets to the Samaritan woman, he has figured it out.
Seems like they've dedicated a lot more miracle time to John than to
Yeah.
synoptics, which I think is interesting as well, just as an editorial decision. And I think that the 5,000 that they have in here is the one from John.
Certainly an explanation.
Right.
Jesus explains the significance of the loaves and the fishes.
Yeah. And Jesus is the one who gives out the loaves. And Jesus is kind of the center of the miracle. He doesn't tell his disciples, you give them something. In John, he does it himself.
Did any of y'all have a story, whether it's in this chapter or other places in the gospel, a healing story that's one of your favorite? And what is it about it that maybe makes it your favorite? Or maybe you don't even like a healing story. That's okay.
I don't remember which gospel it's in, but I think it's right after the transfiguration, where there's a father whose son perhaps has a demon, and he's the disciples are unable to drive out the demon. So Jesus talks to the father and says something about, you know, all things are powerful for those who believe. Father says, I believe, help my unbelief. What is it that effect? There's just this desperation. And to me, that's what prayer sounds like. A desperate cry that doesn't even make sense. I believe, help my unbelief. I don't know. To me, there's something powerful about that story.
And the thing I find troubling a little bit in all of the stories is that I just too often heard someone say, well, she wasn't here because she didn't have that faith. Or you just have to have that faith. And that doesn't always happen. I've seen too many people that love the Lord and they still die. They're not here. And
And we're all gonna die. No, we're not. We're all gonna die, just like Lazarus died.
a lot used by. But that troubles me that some people, you know, oh, you just didn't have enough faith. She didn't have enough faith. That's why she died.
Have any of y'all run into that in your
Yes.
own experience? Yeah, I've seen it. I mean, other people and not in Episcopal circles, but other Christian circles I've definitely seen it. I saw my best friend go through 8 years of cancer, and she had a lot of times she was healed supposedly, and then she wouldn't be, and she had so much faith that she never doubted at all. And then when it came time that she finally had the cancer that did not cure at all, she was just, I mean, she was just amazing. Because she never blocked, she never questioned the Lord, she never questioned her faith. She just said, you know, this is how it's gonna be. And then towards the end, she looked at me one day and she said, you know, I don't know, I think maybe I'm done. She said, because, you know, y'all are gonna have to go through a lot of stuff that I'm not gonna make it. And I just, it made me scared. But she used to tell me that when she did her daily devotionals, she had a chair that she put across from me. And she imagined that Jesus was sitting in the chair. And they discussed everything in the morning.
I think it will be that way.
Oh, my goodness,
That's what
and
I-
she was always at peace about everything. Through all these years. And I also think, like, we're all given different personalities, right? And different abilities. And that was one of hers. And so we give thanks to God for that, but not everyone who's faithful is going to have such peace and such clarity.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I think, again, that's an important thing to emphasize. Some of the most faithful Christians that I know are crippled by anxiety, depression. So it's really important to remember that. Faith is not just a cure for whatever ails us.
Yeah.
And it's we can say that and also say it's a great source of strength.
Yes.
So again,
And I'm also thinking too about someone I knew one time who'd gone to a healing service. We don't do these here. Have y'all been to a healing service? Like in the diocese I came from, it was kind of standard practice on Wednesday evening. You know, we had Eucharistic healing, so you're immediately holy. Is that something? Yeah. It's a beautiful service. And I'll never forget someone, I'm feeling like he was healed
Mhm.
in the moment of, you know, the anointing and the prayer. And I think he was, but what he didn't realize was he was also going to have to walk into that healing every day. It was an alcohol issue. Felt totally healed, but thought that didn't mean, you know, I still have my part to finally going forward.
I was just about to say that Alcoholics Anonymous we learned so much
Yeah.
on a greater being and
Mhm.
more steps and everything else like that. It's very powerful.
It is powerful. I've said this a lot. There are people a lot smarter than I, theologians, who say the Alcoholics Anonymous movement and the 12-step movement is America's distinctive contribution to theology.
wow.
To be lasting forever. And that's got all the hallmarks of healing, right? It's community. You're restored to a community when there are times when no other person will have you, but you've got this community of support. And it's an ongoing.
The 12 steps were formulated by an Episcopal priest.
You know, I don't know.
Okay.
Because I've been reading lately about a Roman Catholic fellow who was Bill W's like spiritual director. So I don't know, but yes, it can definitely connect you to Christian faith. And was really and is able really to tap into holiness, in a way that even if people have been burned by the church or organized religion or are not Christian, can still have access to that holy God. One of my favorite healing stories is also one of the briefest. It's where Jesus heals a man who's deaf and cannot speak, which I always find is interesting because, like, well, if he's deaf, of course he cannot speak, but they're really clear explains about both of these challenges. And then I think it's also one where, you know, Jesus spits on his tongue, puts his spit on there and puts his hands in his ears. And all he says is be open. And I think it's one of these where we even have Jesus' actual words, ephata, like it's the Aramaic Jesus, like be open. And he's open to, you know, take in sound and to utter intelligible speech and just the phrase be open. Like, what was the phrase that struck you? Oh Lord, I believe, on my unbelief. You know, there are these phrases that we can live with. I had a button one time that said be open. Oh, it was from the ministry, the Episcopal Deaf Ministry. It's somewhere been lost.
And the sort of two-part miracle of healing the blind man, it doesn't quite take the first time, you know, and you see I can see you, but it looks like trees walking. Okay, let me try again.
Yeah, one of the things that I love about the Chosen's, the way they depict these healings is they're quiet. You know, they're not overly dramatic, you know, and they do, I mean, it says Jesus looked up to heaven, and they have Jesus looking up to heaven very quietly, you know, healing someone. I think the challenge I have with how they depict him is it's often depicted so individually. And I don't even know that first century culture really understood an individual. I mean, Jesus valued individual people, but everyone was so embedded. And the Chosen, he goes up to some people and says, well, I'll heal you, you know, so what you want. I don't know, but in a way that doesn't necessarily get them a lot farther than they were before. And that's why I was hoping, like, there's a blind woman in Chosen that follows this part of their group. And I thought, oh, she's always going to be blind. This is awesome. Because Jesus wasn't able to, or however it went, heal everyone. There's just no one. But at least one of the disciples that follows him is crippled. He's got the equivalent of the actor has spina bifida. And I keep thinking, you know, I hope this one they really won't quote unquote heal. Because this actor is not going to be healed of that in his movie. So it's just interesting. Have we run the course? What about the multiplication of the loaves and fishes? This is what. What? Oh, mosquito. There's mosquitoes in the other building too. I guess it's painting. I don't know. But the multiplication of the loaves and fishes. This is what Cynthia Kittredge, who's the dean of the seminary, and I think she taught you New Testament things. Yeah. She calls this the picnic in the wilderness. I just love that. It is a picnic in the wilderness. What kind of thoughts or questions or other observations do you have about this?
I wonder what the disciples are.
As they're handing out, as
Well,
Jesus
what they were thinking before that,
Mhm.
and then as they were.
Now we're gonna do this.
I wouldn't feed them, and it happens. I was reading a sermon that Barbara Brown Taylor did on this, and I loved her take on it, which probably y'all have heard. I've heard certainly that the miracle is people shared what was in their pockets, you know, and in their little go bags and whatever, because you know they had them come out to the wilderness. And she says we can often get hung up on, well, how did this really happen? Like when someone took some bread out, did bread automatically then, you know, appear? Were you able to watch it or not? And she said, well, what if it was like, you know, both a miracle of people sharing the morsels when they saw the little to start with. They decided, well, I can risk sharing this, you know, this little bit of fish and bread that I have. What if it was like a both and? What if people were sharing and these things? Jesus is Lord of all creation, right? As multiplying loaves and fishes. You know, we'll never know.
I always think of a church supper that I went to one time and you were supposed to bring something, you know, they do for the salad. And the only one salad was there. And everybody got salad. Because they reduced the amount that they were going to take. So everybody, so I always think, they didn't take that much, you know, they said morsel, they took. Yeah,
Right. Hungry people also. Wow, these people were hungry. Jesus Christ. But anyway,
I'm amazed that they left them.
yes, well, fasted people.
It does say they ate until they were satisfied.
That's
I
true.
think that other gospels use the word filled perhaps, but you know, again, this is more of a subsistence level culture. They don't stuff themselves.
Right.
the way that we do today. We can literally eat as much as we want to.
Everything.
Yeah.
If you can believe God is gonna feed all the Israelites and Moses out in the desert, this is
Right.
an easy story to believe.
That's right, it's not the first bread miracle, is it?
Right.
Right, manna in the wilderness. Yeah.
I think the pigs get a bad rap in this story.
I agree, that's kind of painful.
He did go. Why can't Jesus just send the demons off into the lake and let them drown? He's gotta take the herd of pigs with him.
Yeah,
They don't eat pigs, right? Okay, they eat pigs.
right, but he was also in Gentile territory, right?
Okay, well, that,
So-
they shouldn't do that.
Right.
Yeah, when in Rome. Go into Gentile territory and kill all the pigs.
All the bacon, that,
I don't know if they were mad about that. I would, that's one thing I've always wanted to know is, you know, how they feel about Jesus.
you talking about the pigs?
Well,
The
the
herders.
farmers, yeah, the herders, you know.
Pigs just don't get a break. You know.
That's true.
Of course, they could have been wild pigs like we have around here. They've been all right then.
Well, this is true, but I think don't they mention some pig farmers, at some point in the story, so. Not all, just the wild hogs.
My grandson raised pigs when he was 40. And his dad, he'll do this for pen up there in the pigs right there. And it's in the state, pen, you just gotta come out of these pigs are small.
Oh, that's for sure.
Really, he's right. I was like, okay.
What, do you remember how they were smart?
They just thought they knew, you know, they knew exactly. But they kind of got along, you know, and they knew what they could.
That
do.
is smart, and we might
the
be
way
learning
we
from
did,
some.
or if they better not take that as food, or, you know.
I put their intelligence level compared to dogs. I mean, they're really very, very, very smart and adaptable. You know, that's what makes them such troublemakers. Places like
But what they say about them around here is that a litter of pigs can have 7 babies and 8 of them survive. I mean,
But they don't have a.
They multiply like crazy.
Now, on a complete tangent, you know, next Sunday, we're gonna have a fish fry here.
Right.
And at the same time, they're gonna be having a fundraiser over at St. Peter's Lutheran Church where they're serving sausage. So this is like an opportunity for surf and turf here in Baltimore. Fried fish and pigs. So, yeah, so good fundraiser over there. We're gonna have a good old time here too. Eat lots of fish and then get over to St.
There's a spring.
Ours is free, that's correct, but theirs is funding their blessing and backpack ministry.
Oh, okay.
So,
Okay, so no class next week. Hang on to your enthusiasm in
Right,
Transfiguration.
Lazarus.
Lazarus, for the other stories and we'll see, I think that'll be All Saints Sunday. Good. Thank you. Bless you.
Thank you.
How are you? It's a good thing I looked at my gas can because it was in the quick scanner and it's like. I said, I'm not gonna make it. Did you get worn out last night or yesterday? Oh, after all of that, about 6 o'clock, he came and it did the sun.
We are.
And we got, molly bolts and all of those